Good morning, grade 11s. I hope you're all well, and I hope you all coped with yesterday's meeting. Remember that if you've got any queries, you're welcome to email either Mrs. Florenza or myself. Doesn't matter who teaches you. You're welcome to email us and tell us what your queries are, and we will try and help you. Also realize that there are ASP meetings scheduled, and if you would like a face-to-face ASP meeting with either one of us, you're welcome to contact us, and we will organize that we have a meeting via Google Meet to answer your questions. If you do decide that you want an ASP with either one of us, then it helps us if you email us the questions in advance. And the reason why is because if we need resources, we can go and find those resources and have them ready for when we need to answer your questions, when we chat to you. Okay, all right. So carrying on from last lesson, and I'm going to switch off the video at this point because that's just distracting. Right. Okay, so we were busy with gaseous exchange in various organisms, and I yesterday defined a whole lot of the terminology and spoke about why organisms need to do gaseous exchange. Now remember, we're only concerned with animals at the moment. We're not considering plants at all. We're only considering animals. And I spoke about the fact that gaseous exchange is necessary because living organisms require oxygen for cellular respiration. Remember that cellular respiration is the process whereby organisms convert the energy in food to energy in a usable form. In other words, to energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. During that process, organisms then produce carbon dioxide and water. And the carbon dioxide has to be excreted from the organism. In many cases, the water is as well. However, very interestingly, many organisms will actually use that water for other processes in the body. Okay, so I'm going to say that all again because that was quite a long sentence. Living organisms require oxygen for cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process where energy in food is converted to energy in the form of ATP. Then the cells of the living organism can use that ATP. Carbon dioxide and water are produced during the process. Carbon dioxide needs to be excreted because it's toxic if it accumulates. Water, if there's too much, also needs to be excreted. But some organisms will use that water in other processes in the body for which they need water. And a classic example of that would be a camel, where the camel doesn't store water in the hump, but rather breaks down the fat in the hump during cellular respiration or in the process of cellular respiration. And in that process produces water, and that water is used for metabolic activities by that camel. Okay. All right, so we're going to look at some small, simple animals and the cells of sponges and cnidarians. I'm going to say that again, cnidarians, organisms that belong to the group Cnidaria. And examples of cnidarians are hydra or jellyfish, which are actually a lot bigger than the ones I'm going to talk about now, or blue bottles, or sea anemones. And all of these organisms have cells that are in direct contact with the environment. And in this case, for cnidarians and sponges, their environment is water. So if you consider this little tiny animal organism called Hydra, here it is here, it's tiny, tiny. It's about 1 centimeter long. It has a little mouth at the top here, and then it's got a ring of tentacles around the mouth. And on those tentacles are stinging cells. And so tentacles, stinging cells, defining feature of all cnidarians. Because this organism is so tiny, those stinging cells wouldn't harm a human if one touched them. But they're very cute. These cnidarians live in fresh water, Hydra. And what you can see is if you cut a cross section through the body, and why is it a cross section? It's because it's through the short axis of the body, so it's a cross section. If it was this way, it would be through the long axis of the body, and it would be longitudinal. Here we've got a cross section. And what you can see is that the body consists only of 2 layers of cells. So there's an outer layer and an inner layer. There's also a lot of water in this cavity in the organism, in the body cavity. And so there's oxygen dissolved in this water, and there's oxygen dissolved in the water around the outside. And so large surface area exposed to the oxygen in the water, and a very small volume of cells. Okay, so oxygen will diffuse from this water or that water into the cells over the entire surface area. So, simple animals that lack specialized gas exchange surfaces tend to have flattened or tubular or thin shaped body plans, and these are the most efficient for gaseous exchange. However, these simple animals are rather small in size. So some animals use their outer surfaces, their skin, as a gaseous exchange surface. And examples would be earthworms and some other annelids. An earthworm is in fact an example of an annelid. A frog utilizes its skin for gaseous exchange. It does also have lungs, and it also does gaseous exchange through the lining of the mouth, but in fact, its skin is a very important organ for gaseous exchange. Some arthropods, remember that arthropods are organisms that have externally jointed appendages and an exoskeleton. So examples would be all insects, crabs and other crustaceans, millipedes, centipedes, arachnids, that's spiders. So defining feature, exoskeleton, and externally jointed appendages. In other words, arms and legs, or else they wouldn't be able to bend them. So some arthropods and all fish use gills. We'll talk about that. Terrestrial vertebrates utilize internal lungs. In other words, their gaseous exchange surface is internal in the body, and that's critical because we've spoken about the fact that a gaseous exchange surface needs to be moist. So as soon as you've got an animal that doesn't live in water, then the gaseous exchange surface has the potential to dry out very quickly, and therefore the organism would die. And that's why their lungs are internal in the body to help keep them moist, to enable gaseous exchange. Right, so here's some really nifty little animals. This one is the cutest little thing. It's called Planaria. It's a little flatworm. So it's dorso-ventrally flattened. In other words, if you take a cross-section of it here, you can see that it's flattened from top to bottom, not from side to side or end to end. And it's tiny. It's about, I don't know, about 4 centimeters long. They live in fresh water. They're exceptionally cute. They've got these funny little eye spots. Okay. They use their body surface as a gaseous exchange surface. So, as a gaseous exchange surface has to remain moist to enable the diffusion of gases, these animals always have moist skins. They have mucus glands, adjective, so it's O-U-S, mucus glands secrete mucus, noun, U-S, and that helps to retain the moisture in the body. And they tend to live in damp environments. So if you consider all the animals that have their skins as a gaseous exchange surface, frogs, earthworms, etc., they've got a good slimy skin, and they are only able to live in areas that are relatively moist. You'll never find them out in a really dry area because they will dry out really quickly. And if they dry out, they can't absorb oxygen. They can't absorb oxygen, they're dead. Okay. So an example, and remember everything that is in blue is of interest. You do not have to learn it. So annelids, for example, earthworms. Annelids means segmented worms. Use their outer surface as gaseous exchange surfaces. The skin is well supplied with capillaries. Gaseous exchange occurs between the environment and the animal through the body surface, and then blood transports the oxygen to the tissues, and gaseous exchange occurs between the blood and the cells of the body. Carbon dioxide then goes in a reverse route, and then it passes out the surface of the animal. Okay, again, blue of interest. So amphibians, in other words, frogs, toads, salamanders, use their skin and lungs as a gaseous exchange surface in the adult phase. Because you know that tadpoles, for example, have got gills. So tadpoles are one of the stages in the life cycle of a frog. It's not the adult, and it lives in water all the time. The tadpole does. Hence, its gaseous exchange surface is gills. Frogs eliminate carbon dioxide 2.5 times as fast through their skin as they do through their lungs. Okay, so that's just telling you that the skin is actually a very important gaseous exchange surface. And you can see that this gorgeous little frog is shiny. The surface is shiny. That means that it's covered with mucus. It's good and slimy, and therefore it is able to do gaseous exchange through its body surface. Okay, gills. Gills have evolved in a number of different animal groups. And the type, the particular, it says specific anatomy. That means the particular structure of the gills varies widely according to the particular kind of animal. But as a general rule, gills consist of fine sheets or filaments of tissue that extend outwards from the body into the water. So if you look here, this is the gills of a fish, and you can see the gill rakers filter the water and remove any impurities from the water, and then the water passes over the gill filaments. Now, you can see a lot of things here to do with the gill filaments. When I spoke about the important features of a gaseous exchange surface, you can see, in fact, immediately 4 of them here. Okay, 1, large surface area in relation to the volume, because look how divided this is. And each little tiny extension here means it has a large surface area in relation to its volume. And gill filaments are very thin, very thin. So large surface area in relation to volume for maximum uptake of gases and release of carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's the first one. Secondly, you can see that they are moist because look, they're shiny, so you can see that they're moist. Thirdly, you can see that there's a high concentration of blood because you can see the color. And so that deep red color tells you a large number of blood vessels. And the fourth thing, I knew it just now, it's escaped my little head. I will get back to it when I remember. Okay. Surface area moist, gases exchange, gases. No, I can't do this. Okay. So the other one you can't see, that's why. If the gas exchange surface is thin, that would be microscopic. Okay. All right. So let's talk about gills. Gills are outfoldings of the surface of the body. Look at this exceptionally cute salamander. It's an axolotl. Okay, so an axolotl is a little salamander. It's a kind of amphibian, and it lives in this stage for its whole life. It doesn't become an adult that lives out of water. So for its whole life, it lives in water, and it's got these exceptionally cute gills that extend out from the body. So an axolotl. If you go to Yebohocha at Wits Ever, remember, it's an exhibition that they have for a whole week for approximately, it's definitely for a whole week. And it's normally in May, and sadly, obviously this year it has been cancelled. Then when you go down to the museum on the bottom floor of the Life Sciences building at Wits, then you will see that there is a tank where they keep at least one axolotl. So go and visit said animal. It's really cute. Okay, so what do gills do? They increase the surface area for gaseous exchange, and they're always organized into a series of plates. They may be internal, as occurs in crabs and fish, or they may be external to the body, as occurs in some amphibians. So, for example, the axolotl, or in some stage of the life cycle of amphibians, for example, tadpoles. Okay, right. Let's have a quick look at how fish ventilate their gills. Now, if they are cartilaginous fish, so sharks and rays are examples of cartilaginous fish. Their skeleton is made of cartilage, not of bone. Then they don't have a gill cover or an operculum. So if you go back to this one, see there's a little plate of bone, and that is called an operculum, the gill cover. That's terribly important in the whole process of breathing in a fish that has a bony skeleton. But don't worry about that. It's not an issue in life. So sharks, on the other hand, don't have an operculum. So they can't suck water in and push it over their gills. So in the case of sharks, they've got to carry on moving, because if they don't, then water doesn't come in their mouth and go over their gills. Okay, so many fish can undergo gaseous exchange while stationary, ARY, so you know it means standing still, and do so by sucking water into their mouth and forcibly expelling it over the gills and out through the operculum. And that doesn't happen in sharks because they don't have an operculum. Okay, so if you look here, this is what a bony fish does. It has a little cover operculum, which has been cut off or removed in this drawing so that you can see the gills underneath. And what actually happens is they open their mouth, water is sucked in, they then close the mouth, and they force the water, rich in oxygen, over the gills, and the blood in the gills becomes oxygenated. Right, okay, so a variety of animal groups have gills. Some arthropods, we've spoken about that, some annelids, some fish, and various amphibians. Okay, all right. So gills are very efficient at removing oxygen from water. There is only about 1/20th the amount of oxygen present in water as occurs in the same volume of air. So gills have to be more efficient than, say, lungs are. Water always flows over gills in one direction. Blood flows in the opposite direction through the gill capillaries. This is called a countercurrent. Don't obsess. And this maximizes the absorption of oxygen. Okay. All right, terrestrial animals, animals that live on land. So that would be, as a rule, mammals, obviously not all because of whales and dolphins in them, birds, reptiles. Now, remember that there are exceptions to this rule, and amphibians. Okay. And then obviously a whole lot of insects and other animals as well. So many terrestrial animals have their gas exchange surfaces inside the body and connected to the outside by a series of tubes. And the inside the body thing I've spoken about is to reduce the likelihood of desiccation. And let's talk about the spelling of the word desiccation. A lot of you like to write it with D-E-S-S because that's what it sounds like. But sorry, it's 1 S, 2 C's. Okay, all right. So let's talk about vertebrates having lungs, other than obviously the fish, but we're talking terrestrial vertebrates. It's insects, centipedes, mites, spiders have a tracheal respiratory system, not all spiders. Why are written spiders here? Spiders have got book lungs. Okay, ignore spiders for a moment. Okay, so all insects are aerobic. In other words, they must obtain oxygen from the environment in order to survive. They have a gaseous exchange surface system that is a complex network of tubes called a tracheal system. And what actually happens is there are tubes that branch right throughout the body. Their blood does not transport oxygen. They actually have tubes that go the whole way through the body, and oxygen is delivered to every single cell of the body and carbon dioxide removed from every single cell of the body. So they have little tubes, and these tubes are called tracheas, and they carry air directly to the cells for gaseous exchange. How does the air get into the body? They're tiny little valve-like openings called spiracles in the exoskeleton, and I'll show you a picture of them now. These are located laterally, in other words, along the side of the thorax and the abdomen of most insects. Airflow is regulated by small muscles that operate 1 or 2 flap-like valves within each spiracle, and they contract to close the spiracle, or they relax to open the spiracle. And insects have quite a complex way of, you open these spiracles, you close those, you breathe in, contract those muscles, blah blah, thingamabob. And so they have quite a complex system of ventilating, in other words, sucking in air rich in oxygen and getting rid of air rich in carbon dioxide. And this is a really good example of label lines that don't end on the correct thing. Okay, so here there's a caterpillar, and these little structures here are spiracles. Okay, so what's wrong with this labeling system? 3 things that I can see. Okay, 1, begins with a capital letter and shouldn't. I can only see 2 after all. Okay, sorry. I'm going to have to stop saying I can see this many of those things and whatever, because you can see I can't. Okay. And these label lines don't go to the correct place. They should go to these structures. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. And this is an animal of which I'm exceptionally fond. It's called a tarpulid, and it looks like a big mosquito. And very often people confuse tarpulids with mosquitoes and they kill them. So these are little flying animals. You'll sometimes see them flying against the wall. They fly exceptionally badly. Way back in the day when the cartoon strip Peanuts was fashionable. There was a little bird in Peanuts that flew badly. And so we always used to have last year talk about the fact that tarpulids fly as badly as that little bird did. Okay, so anyway, don't kill tarpulids. They're not mosquitoes. They do not bite you. They do not bite any, they don't suck blood. But what they do is tarpulid larvae kill mosquito larvae in water. So if you kill tarpulids, you'll have more mosquitoes. You might as well not kill them, because then you can have fewer mosquitoes. But anyway, that was all a total sidetrack. Look what you can see here though. So there are the spiracles along the side of the abdomen, and there'll obviously be another set along the other side of the abdomen. You can also see very clearly, and this is a total side branch because it's got nothing to do with this topic. But this is a beautiful picture of the second pair of wings. So tarpulids must belong to the group Diptera, to which flies belong. And unlike the rest of the insects, which normally have two pairs of wings, they have a front pair of wings that is used for flying, and a second pair of wings that is reduced to something called a haltera. There's a haltera, and there will be another one here that you can't see. And those are not used for flying other than for balance. Anyway, total sidebar. So the spiracles, each spiracle leads into a tube called a trachea. The trachea branches repeatedly. Every single cell of the body lies right next to a branch of the trachea. And the tiny, tiny branches contain moisture. So oxygen dissolves in the liquid, diffuses into the cytoplasm of a cell that lies next to it. Carbon dioxide, produced as a waste product, diffuses out of the cell, out of the body through the tracheal system. So air-rich in carbon dioxide passes out of the body through the spiracles. Okay, so this then is a drawing showing the internal structure of an insect. Okay, that's a grasshopper. And what you can see here, colored blue, is the big tracheal systems, not the tiny ones, because there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of very tiny ones that go to all parts of the body. So this just shows you that the spiracles are open to the surface and they lead into branches called trachea or tracheal tubes that branch and branch and branch, and there are many of them. Okay, so now we're getting onto the human gas exchange system. Okay, now this is the nicest drawing that I could find for you, but it does include the lymphatic system, which just means these little green lymph nodes that are here. Ignore them, they're irrelevant here, but this is the best diagram I could find in terms of all that it showed you. Okay, so let's go. Remember, you may only label in the plural when the label line goes to more than one object, as occurred twice here. So they're showing you two alveoli in this drawing on the right. So it would be singular, alveolus, but because the label line goes to two, the label is alveoli. And the second place it occurs is in terms of the bronchus. So two bronchi, singular, bronchus. So let's go up on this drawing, look on the right side. So it tells you here there is a right and a left bronchus. So because the label line goes to two of them, it's bronchi. Okay, all right, so that's the end of that little lecture. Let's talk about the labels here. Okay, so the gaseous exchange system of a human, because human is a mammal, is obviously the alveoli of the lungs. So let's talk about what happens during breathing. Air would go in through the nostrils, into the nasal passages, to the back of the nasal passages, to the pharynx. And I spoke about pharynx when I spoke about pharynx in terms of the digestive system. So you know about the pharynx. And then the air, which is rich in oxygen, and please be careful, don't just talk about inhaling oxygen. It's not oxygen, it's all the other gases that are in the air as well. Passes down this tube here, which is the trachea. Okay, we'll talk about the trachea in more detail later on. I'm just giving you an overview now. Top part of the trachea, remember, is the voice box or larynx. Trachea is held open with rings of cartilage. We'll talk about that in more detail later on. And then you can see trachea is not all that long. It divides into a right and a left bronchus. Okay, remember this is the right side because you're looking at this individual from the front. And so it's a right bronchus and a left bronchus. Okay. And then you can see the right lung and the left lung. The right lung is divided into three lobes, an upper, a middle, and a lower. Don't obsess. The left lung is slightly smaller than the right lung, and it's only got two lobes. And the reason why it's slightly smaller is because here in the middle, here in a little space, you don't have to know its name, the name of the space, but it does have a name. And here is the heart. And remember that the heart is not entirely centralized in the body. It's points slightly towards the left side. And so more space on the left side of the thoracic cavity is taken up by the heart than is taken up by the heart on the right side. So there's a little bit of heart here on the right side, but the majority of it is towards the left side. That leaves less space for the left lung, and so the left lung is smaller than the right lung. And the left bronchus is longer than the right one because the place where it enters into the lung is further away from the midline than occurs on the right side here. I hope you understood that. So the right bronchus is a little bit shorter than the left bronchus because the left lung is a little bit further over towards the left side and the right is towards the right side. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, don't obsess. It's not critical. Okay, so the bronchus on each side branches and branches and branches into smaller bronchi, smaller. All of them still have rings of cartilage until finally they are so tiny that they no longer have rings of cartilage. This is muscle here. These little rings here are muscle. They're not cartilage rings. And when the bronchi don't have any cartilage at all, their name, it changes and they're called a bronchiole. And each little bronchiole ends in a little bunch of sacs, air sacs, called alveoli, single alveolus, and it looks like nothing so much as a little bunch of grapes. Then leading in here would be an artery carrying deoxygenated blood, in other words, blood that is low in oxygen, high in carbon dioxide. and each little alveolus is completely surrounded by a network of capillaries. And it is at that alveolar surface that carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveolus. So if you look at this little one here, carbon dioxide would diffuse from the deoxygenated blood through the wall of the alveolus into the alveolus. And when the person exhales, it would then, air-rich in carbon dioxide would pass out, and be breathed out. At the same time as that is happening, oxygen will diffuse from the air into the little tiny capillaries, and so the blood in the capillaries would become oxygenated, and so the blood leaving the alveolar sacs in the veins would be oxygenated blood, and it then would go from the alveoli and pass out of the lungs, go to the heart through the pulmonary vein, and then be pumped around the body. So it would be blood rich in oxygen. Okay. So the main task of any gas exchange surface is obviously to absorb oxygen and to get rid of carbon dioxide. The human gas exchange system consists of the lungs, the pathways connecting them to the outside, the structures in the chest involved with air being moved into and out of the lungs, and I'm going to describe all of those to you in detail. Okay, so air is inhaled into the nasal cavities. Those of you who breathe in through your mouth, not ideal. It works, but it's not ideal. It's not the best thing that you can do. The nasal cavity is divided into two separate nasal cavities or separate nasal passages by a dividing wall that runs down the center, and that dividing wall is called a septum. And if you remember back to your lessons on the heart last year, you learned about a septum being a dividing wall that divides the heart into a left and a right side. Same kind of thing, longitudinal dividing wall. There are 3 bones in each nasal passage called turbinate bones, and they jut into the nasal passages from the side walls, and their function is to increase the surface area in contact with the air to enhance the preparation of the air before it reaches the lungs. And I'll talk about that just now. Okay. All the way along the nasal passages, all the way along, right until the end of the little bronchioles. Those passages, or the air passages, are lined with a mucous membrane made of ciliated columnar epithelium. Remember you learned about this last year. Okay, so it's mucous membrane because it's an adjective, and in fact it's pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, not just plain columnar epithelium. But if you didn't learn that, or you don't remember that, don't obsess about it. Just learn it as being a columnar epithelium, a ciliated columnar epithelium. So what are the critical issues with the ciliated columnar epithelium? Twofold. One, there are many cilia on the surface, and that's going to be critical. We'll talk about that. In addition, there are lots of goblet cells. Remember, goblet cells, you learned about that last year. And goblet cells secrete mucus. Mucus, because it's a noun, it's spelled that way. Okay, so the goblet cells produce mucus, and then when there's enough mucus in a goblet cell, then the mucus is expelled to the exterior, and it forms a layer of mucus on the surface of the cilia, and the mucus is nice and wet and sticky, and that means But any dust particles, and hopefully a lot of also microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, and things like that, stick to the sticky mucus. And remember, you learned last year that the cilia then beat in a rhythmic fashion. And what they do is they move, so they move forcefully in one direction, and not so forcefully they return back to their original position. So it's basically like crowd surfing. These little cilia will move like a conveyor belt, the layer of mucus away from the lungs always. So it'll be up away from the lungs towards either the throat where the mucus gets swallowed back into the digestive system and digested, or if it's in the nasal passages, then normally it will also go to the throat unless there's too much, in which case it comes out of the throat. So a little quick, I'm going to stop this for a moment and I'm going to show you that. Okay, so what happens is the cilia will move in a forceful direction, pushing the mucus upwards, and when it gets to the throat, it's swallowed backwards into the esophagus. It goes down into the digestive system and it's digested. Or if it happens in the nasal passages, normally when there's not too much mucus, the cilia move the mucus down the nasal passages, again to the back of the throat, into the esophagus, goes to the stomach, digested. If a person has an infection or an allergy and there's a lot of mucus, then the cilia will move the mucus towards the nose and it'll come out through the nose. Okay, I need to go back to this. Okay, right, we're happy. We need to get rid of that camera. Camera. I can't see how to stop the camera here. Okay, there we go. Okay, are you all happy with the ciliated columnar epithelium? Good. Let's go. Right. So the goblet cells of the ciliated columnar epithelium secrete mucus that covers the epithelium. The mucus traps the dust. Just be very careful. Every year we get students who say to us, the cilia trap the dust. They don't. The mucus traps the dust and microorganisms, and the cilia beat to remove the dust-laden mucus from the air passages by moving it to the nose to be sneezed out or blown out, or to the top of the trachea to be passed, good heavens, into the esophagus. Okay, so we've spoken about turbinate bones, I've spoken about the septum. Okay, let's just finally talk about the preparation of the air before it reaches the lungs. And I said I would discuss this in more detail just now. So before the air reaches the lungs, 4 things must happen to it. And I said I wasn't going to say 4, but I'm like 99% certain it's 4. I think I've got the next one on the next slide. I'm sorry. You know, I can't count. We've discussed this issue. Okay. So the air must be moistened or else the lungs would dry out. And remember, a gaseous exchange surface must be moist. And it would be no good if the lungs dried out, because then the person would die. It must be warmed, because if it reaches the lungs and it's too cold, then the body would lose too much heat in the exhaled air. Okay. And it must be filtered to remove harmful dust and microorganisms. And please let there be a number 4 on the next. There isn't. I can't believe it. Yeah, like me. Okay, all right. So there are 3 things. Sorry, guys. Okay. For work for today, besides learning all this work and learning the terminology and learning the structure, is to answer question 2 on page 214 of the textbook. Okay, all right. We've spoken about the pharynx. We've spoken about the larynx. So I just need to write down that homework here. The pharynx, the two openings of the nasal passages and the mouth meet at the pharynx or the throat, the back of the nose and the mouth. And the pharynx is part of the digestive system, as well as, I've got a respiratory system. Yeah, like me. Okay, gas exchange system, because it carries both food and air. And then the larynx, we've spoken about the larynx being essential to human speech. Okay, so this region is the pharynx, the funnel shaped region. And this shows the passage of air. Okay, so there's the esophagus. The esophagus lies behind the trachea. The trachea is in front. And remember that this then is the epiglottis. And so when a person is swallowing, it's terribly important that the food doesn't go down into the trachea, because then it would block it. So this is the epiglottis, and remember, it functions like the lid of a pedal bin in your kitchen. And it flaps downwards and covers the opening to the trachea when an individual is swallowing, but it flaps upwards when the person is not swallowing. Okay, right, and then that's enough for today. And do that homework, which was question 2, I think, of page 214. And please, please, please learn the structure and the terminology. Okay, remember, you're welcome to email either Mrs. Florenza or me. Please correct me in terms of English grammar if you have any questions. Okay, all right.